2015. In another year of extraordinary challenges for the world community, the United Nations turned 70. A time to look back at its founding document, the Charter, and to create a new vision of a future in peace and dignity. In September, member states united to adopt Agenda 2030, promising they would act on a transformative vision by setting 17 sustainable development goals that span education to gender equality, to good governance, and sustainable energy for all. The mission is to end extreme poverty in all its forms over the next 15 years.
The world continues to squander trillions in wasteful military spending. Why is it easier to find the money to destroy people and planet than it is to protect them?
Turmoil in Yemen, Syria, Libya, South Sudan, and many other places brought suffering to new heights. At least 60 million people have fled their homes, the highest number of displaced since World War II. The reign of terror by fanatical groups like ISIL or Daesh not only sent millions of people in the Middle East running for their lives, their franchises spread fear throughout the world. In Kenya, 147 students died in a militant attack on Garissa University. Paris lost more than 100 people in a night of mass shootings and terror. Some of the suicide bombers were only teenagers. In September, world leaders converged on the UN and took up the fight against terrorism. US President Barack Obama.
Defeating ISIL requires, I believe, a new leader and an inclusive government that unites the Syrian people in the fight against terrorist groups. We are prepared to work with all countries, including Russia and Iran, to find a political mechanism in which it is possible to begin a transition process.
Russian President Vladimir Putin shared a different vision with the General Assembly.
We think it is an enormous mistake to refuse to cooperate with the Syrian government and its armed forces, who are valiantly fighting terrorism face to face. We should finally acknowledge that no one but President Assad's armed forces and Kurdish militias are truly fighting the Islamic State and other terrorist organizations in Syria.
In November, the Security Council united to adopt a resolution to take all possible measures in compliance with the UN Charter to prevent and suppress terrorist acts. In Yemen, insurgencies, airstrikes, and proxy battles have turned the country into a humanitarian catastrophe, leaving 80% of the population in need of assistance.
My sister and I become so frightened when we hear the bullets. We are afraid that we will die. I do not like war, I like peace.
In December, during UN-sponsored talks in Switzerland, a temporary suspension of hostilities in Yemen was announced. The UN urged parties to use this lull to advance the peace process. In Libya, the UN brokered an agreement to form a new unity government after months of difficult talks between the rival parties. But conflict continues. Waves of terror hit Nigeria, where Boko Haram has killed more than 20,000 people in the last 6 years. 2.5 million people either fled across borders or are homeless in their own country. In the Central African Republic, violence has continued, disrupting the political process and hindering the vital work of the humanitarian agencies. Peace talks in South Sudan. But fighting continued in various states despite a ceasefire deal, leading to yet another round of peace talks. Despite Burundi's election to the UN Human Rights Council, their own presidential elections in July were overshadowed by allegations of human rights violations. More than 100,000 Burundians have fled the country, many of them across the lake to Tanzania and Rwanda. Signs of success in Western Africa. The number of Ebola cases has declined dramatically. Observers state Palestine now proudly flies its flag on UN premises. Historic nuclear agreement with Iran. 6 major powers agreed to lift sanctions they had imposed on Iran if the country promised to scale back dramatically its nuclear program. In another breakthrough, the people of Myanmar went to the polls in November's historic election that returned the party of Aung San Suu Kyi to power. Meanwhile, in Nepal, a devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake presented unique challenges to the people and the UN and its agencies. Delivering food and supplies to most inaccessible mountain areas, providing locals with shelter and cash grants to rebuild their houses and infrastructure. At his historic visit to the UN in September, Pope Francis made a strong appeal to world leaders to put care for the planet, humanity, and nature at the top of their moral agenda.
The misuse and destruction of the environment are also accompanied by a relentless process of exclusion. In effect, a selfish and boundless thirst for power and material prosperity leads both to the misuse of available natural resources and to the exclusion of the weak and disadvantaged.
2 weeks of tireless negotiations at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris led to a moment of triumph. For the first time, 195 countries adopted a universal agreement to curb emissions, strengthen resilience, and join hands to take common climate action. All countries agreed to hold the rise of global temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius. Uniting in blue, the world remembered the 70th anniversary of the United Nations. New challenges wait in the next decade. Achieving zero hunger, finding solutions for conflicts and climate change.